Welcome to episode 1 of Bleav In Lightning. I'm your host, Adam Denker. Thank you for joining me on this first episode of Bleav In Lightning, part of the Bleav Podcast Network. On this episode, we are doing a little bit of an introduction. We are going to talk about what the Lightning have accomplished thus far, as well as what could we expect them to accomplish this season, as well as doing a little bit of a recap as to some of the moves they made this summer. But before we grab any of those topics, please go ahead and subscribe to us wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead and check us out on there. If you want to follow more of my work, go on to Twitter at DenkyDank, DenkyD8NK. You could also follow me on boltsbythebay.com. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Adam Denker, and I have been covering the Tampa Bay Lightning for the last 5 seasons. I started in February of 2020. I was at a previous podcast called Locked On Lightning, so some of you may know me from there. I've also been the editor at boltsbythebay.com for the last couple of months covering the Tampa Bay Lightning. So on my past show, and I will recap some of that on today's episode as we kind of get to know each other. For maybe some of you that are new to my work, I've been talking about pretty much all summer since really the playoffs concluded with the Lightning losing to the Florida Panthers in the first round, that this was a team that was going to have a lot of big questions to answer this offseason. We kind of already knew going throughout the course of the season what the issues were with this team. Defense primarily was a big issue for this team all season long. And that was kind of the main reason, I think, in my opinion, that we didn't see a good version of Andrei Vasilevskiy really until later on in the season, as well as in the playoffs. Even though the Lightning did lose that series, I thought that Andrei Vasilevskiy was really the best we've seen him since they played the Avalanche back in the Stanley Cup final in 2022. But the Lightning really needed to clean up their game. That was a big emphasis, I think, going into the offseason, as well as along with the whole Steven Stamkos thing, which we'll get into in just a moment. But the Lightning really needed to figure out what they could do to really get better, because as we've known over the last couple of years, the Lightning have really not been able to progressively get better like we're normally accustomed to. They've had immense salary cap constraints. This season was no exception. Yeah, they were able to relieve some salary cap with certain players leaving, with Steven Stamkos possibly coming off the books, which he eventually did. But the real point of focus was the blue line. And they did address that. They ended up trading for Ryan McDonagh, which I thought was a very good trade. I thought it was a trade that needed to happen. I thought it was something that I wish would have never happened in the first place, because I wish they could have found some sort of way originally to keep Ryan McDonagh in Tampa Bay. And that's back all the way on May 16th, where the Lightning traded for McDonagh along with a 4th round 2024 pick from Nashville in exchange for a 2nd round 2025 and a 7th round 2024 NHL draft pick. And all things considered, you're getting a player who, and by the way, the Lightning won this trade. If anybody thinks that Nashville did, think again. Ryan McDonagh is coming off a couple of years in Tampa Bay where he had a career resurgence. I thought that this was the first time in his career that I've seen him where he has really kind of dived more into the offensive side of his game. And a lot of that also has to do with scheme. You go all the way back to his time when he started with the Rangers. He played in a different scheme there up in New York under John Tortorella. And every Lightning fan should be really familiar with what John Tortorella brings to not only his players, but what he expects out of them. And then you fast forward to the Lightning acquiring him. It's kind of a little bit more of the same to his game. Blocking pucks, playing tough defense, out muscling along the boards. And you did get that from McDonagh, on top of obviously his leadership that I think the Lightning missed the most on the ice. And you trade him away. obviously for salary cap issues, that's something that obviously needed to happen. But like I said, I wish didn't happen at all. And then you kind of sat back, which if we're looking at what the reasoning or the backup plan was at that time, once you trade away Ryan McDonough, it was Eric Chernak. Now, Eric Chernak, we all thought was ready to kind of take on the responsibilities of Ryan McDonough. Obviously, that didn't happen. Chernak has really been a big disappointment since then. And on top of that, has really not been reliable in terms of being able to stay healthy. And that's really been the big issue, especially when you're relying on a player who you really think is going to be able to carry things defensively for your team. Because we all know, as good as Victor Hedman has been throughout the course of his career, we kind of have seen in the past couple of years, especially during the Stanley Cup runs, that his game is kind of gravitated more towards a two-way defenseman as more, not so much the stereotypical defensive blue liner that we kind of associate with him back in the day prior to 2020. And to rely on Chernak, who I think at that time was kind of really not unproven. He was never really put in a big spot to where the team's success almost hinged on it. And I'm not, let me get something straight real quick. I'm not blaming the recent lack there of success on Eric Chernak. No, it's just some individuals, and it's in every sport and every walk of life. Some individuals are just not equipped to take on that big of a burden. It just happens. It's really not something that really we could beat ourselves up over as Lightning fans. But it's just a gamble that unfortunately Julien Brisebois and company missed on. And fast forward a couple of years now, we get him back. I think it does shore up the Lightning in terms of defensiveness. I think that also with the acquirement of JJ Moser from Utah, and just to refresh you all on that, back in June, the Lightning acquired a 4th round pick, which they eventually selected with the 118th overall pick, and a 2nd round pick in 2025 from the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for Tanner Jeannot. And then on that same day, they also acquired JJ Moser, Connor Geekie, and a 7th round pick. That was eventually the 119th pick in the 2024 draft, and a 2nd round pick in the 2025 draft from Utah in exchange for Mikhail Sergachev. Yeah, that kind of seems on paper, just maybe some Lightning fans that were huge Sergachev fans. I was as well. It was a trade that didn't really make sense at the time, but I think in the end, it'll work out for the Lightning because Sergachev, if you listened to my past shows and all that stuff before coming to Bleav, I have said that I thought Sergachev was going to be the main guy. I thought he was going to be the next top defenseman on this Lightning team after Hedman. And obviously that has not been the case either since he signed his extension with the Lightning. And then on top of that, he has a very gruesome injury after just missing a ton of time earlier this year, and then broke his leg and all that. And I think, unfortunate, as we all thought the potential was there for Mikhail Sergachev to succeed long-term in Tampa, I think you kind of got it. You have to go back to what you know. And you kind of have to rebuild a little bit. And the Lightning can afford to do that, considering, like I said, you got McDonough, and now you're kind of rebuilding a little bit from on the prospect side. You're picking up draft picks, you're picking up prospects. Connor Geekie, who I will talk about in future episodes. I absolutely love him. But JJ Moser, who very physical, who could put up a good amount of points and produce offensively as well. I think this does help the Lightning in terms of having that depth that they so desperately needed last year on the defensive side of things. That helps them a ton, and plus it does alleviate some cap space. But at the same time, the Lightning are unfortunately still cap constricted, only having a little bit over $700K in salary cap space. But finally, the big story in our little big recap of what has happened thus far this summer was obviously the exit of Steven Stamkos and little footnote in there. Jake Getzel being acquired. We'll talk about that because they kind of go hand in hand. As we all know, leading into the season, it was going to be very difficult for the Tampa Bay Lightning to be able to work out a deal. I think I said it throughout the course of the season. I said it all the way back last summer that every day that you go without signing Steven Stamkos, your chances of having him back in a Lightning uniform go down more and more. And it came to fruition. And I even said it then when rumors started to come out about an extension for Hedman. It was really at that point where if you're already talking about an extension for another veteran, the chances of him coming back for Stamkos are all but over. And that's what happened. And regardless of how you feel about how the Lightning and Stamkos left things, him going on Sportsnet, or the Lightning really not being able to reach a deal with him, as well as with that initial very low ball offer. At the end of the day, both sides are in the wrong on this situation. I think that really what it comes down to it's just a messy situation. And in situations like this, which you have a legendary player and a team that's still trying to continue to get better as well as win short term, it's really just a situation in which nobody wins and really nobody walks away feeling good about themselves. But at the same time, the Lightning were able to kind of fill in his spot relatively quickly. I Bleav it was the day of or the day after they signed Jake Getzel to, well, first they traded for him. They traded for his rights, and then they ended up signing him for an 8-year deal, which was, I think, a very good deal thus far, with all the potential for the upside that you would get from Getzel. Now, obviously, let me make it very clear, and then we'll move on to expectations for this roster. I think that really what it comes down to is that you can't replace a 40-goal scorer. That's just the facts that are there, and there's really not much you could do about that. But at the same time, Getzel gives you an area of production, a guy who could not just score, but could also play that two-way forward position, and also is still very much younger in his career as opposed to Stamkos, who is 34. You still get a lot more years out of him. Now, obviously, there's going to be a learning curve in the post life without Steven Stamkos. How do you play without this guy? I don't have any. I really don't think it's going to be that big of a learning curve, Bleav it or not, because there are a ton of leaders on this team, as well as really there's just a good foundation in Tampa Bay for them to continue to get better and to continue to compete at a very high level. So we just got done talking about some of the moves, recapping the summer. Now, there still is a lot that needs to be done for this Lightning team. I still think, even though you look at their roster, it kind of looks like things are done or finalized, but I don't. And if that's the case, it would be very disappointing. But I don't think Julien Brisebois, after the summer that he has had thus far, now things have quieted down in stereotypical NHL fashion. I still think that there are going to be some moves that are going to be made later on, whether it be close to camp or maybe even up until the night of opening night, until we kick things off against Carolina. When you look at this team and you look at the initial expectations that you would imagine to have for them, and we're going to wrap things up with that, but real quick, just to preview that, I think that what it comes down to is that you're expecting to, you have a team full of what ifs. And what I mean by that, you need to have a lot to happen in order for things to go really well for the Tampa Bay Lightning this season. Obviously, as is the case every year, the expectation is Stanley Cup. I for people that are expecting, their highest expectations are just getting the playoffs. I don't like that. I don't like that mindset. I didn't even like that mindset when they were winning cups. Let's just gut in and we'll figure it out. I never liked that. I never thought it was a good way to approach anything. It did work here and there, but still, with this group of players, with Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, Victor Hedman, especially when you have the big cat in net, your expectations every year for this Lightning team need to be Stanley Cup, or at least reach the Stanley Cup final. Because at that point, I mean, unless you run into a team that's an absolute juggernaut at that time, I mean, it's really, I think, in my opinion, anybody wins. If you're coming into the final with a heater, you could definitely make things happen to your favor. But when we look at this roster, I think that there are some things, obviously, that are left to be desired. The first big question mark, obviously, that we'll be looking at and will be talked about quite a bit here on Bleav In Lightning throughout the course of the season, as well as, just amongst Lightning fans, will be Connor Sherry. He's projected to be on the third line with Nick Paul, Mikey Esamont. And I look at that fit and I don't like it. I just think that it's also putting the Lightning in a precarious situation, because I don't think Sherry is the kind of player right now, or really has ever been the player since maybe his days in Pittsburgh, if you want to go back that far, that is a spark plug, and that's what really you need out of your third line. You need a team, you need a line of guys to go out there, score, and kind of play like a more offensive fourth line. I mean, that's the best, simplest way you could really put it. And I think that Connor Sherry, I don't think that's going to be a permanent spot for him. I think because with the addition of Jake Getzel, and a lot of people have brought this up, and I wouldn't be opposed to it if you figure out some sort of rotation where Sherry and Getzel are on the ice at the same time. The obvious connection here is that they've won a cup or two together in Pittsburgh, and you would expect that John Cooper is definitely going to try and see if that is a combination that could work for Sherry, because you kind of already know at this point what you're going to get out of Getzel. You're going to get 30 goals. You're going to get maybe 80 points if you're lucky. It really all depends on who he's playing with. Right now, it's projected he's going to be with Point and Cooch, which, if you're betting on that, that is definitely the best. Probably you're going to hit those numbers. That's definitely a sure thing. But with Connor Sherry, he's undersized. He goes games and even weeks without really doing much of anything, and that's really what lies in really the issue of what I have personally. Well, not personally, I will say, in terms of what Connor Sherry does not bring to this team. In past years, yes, we have been spoiled here with the Tampa Bay Lightning of having a very solid third line pairing. I mean, you go back to the Cup teams, Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, Yanni Gourde. I mean, it really probably one of the best third lines that we have seen ever win a cup. And so maybe that's part of it too. The expectations are super high to where you are expecting something more than what you're realistically going to get out of Sherry. But if you look at his numbers in Washington prior, yes, that might have been a little inflated, considering Washington was very probably more offensively deficient than the Lightning because of how they're constructed and really what the mantra is there in Washington, and that is just give the puck to Ovi, and Sherry almost playing a second option there, almost, if you even want to call it that, offensively. You would have figured with all the weapons, especially last season, that Sherry would have not only kept up with those numbers, even if you don't even think they're impressive, at least kept up to those numbers or even surpassed them to a certain extent, regardless of who you would have played. Because I thought this Lightning team last season, with everybody healthy and playing the right way, I mean, you could go back to the month of March, where they were one of the best teams in the league. You would have expected Sherry to kind of put up those numbers, but really that wasn't the case. Injury held them back, as well as, just like I said, there would be games, even weeks, without, you would have never even thought that Connor Sherry was on this team. And that's really the issue. And I'm not saying it in terms of that we think that he was taking a day off. That is far from the case. It's just one of those things right now where the Lightning as a team can't afford to have players just completely disappear. throughout the course of the season. That's really not something that is an option. And even if you're not scoring or if you're not producing, you need to bring something else to this team. And I have not seen that, like I said, with Connor Sherry thus far. And I think that really this year is going to be really, really an important year for the Lightning as well as Connor Sherry. And I wouldn't be surprised if before the season starts, there's some sort of insurance plan for Connor Sherry. If he just doesn't work out, if he starts off the first 20 games, because I think really that's a good measuring stick for any player and any team. First 20 games, if Connor Sherry comes out and he just lays a duck, you kind of need to figure things out real quick because, like I said, you cannot afford, especially in this division, to just get off to a slow start, something that we are all familiar with the Lightning on almost really a nightly basis. And I think that really at the end of the day, if it's not working, you need to switch him out, whether it be with a free agent option or through a trade or through a forward from Syracuse. There's been some talk since his acquisition that Connor Geekie might be an option at some point, whether it be early on in the year or later on. So there are options there. There are options to figure it out. Now, obviously, the big issue there with Sherry is his no trade clause, which if you've followed me over the last couple of years, I do not like no movement clauses. I don't like no trade clauses whatsoever. It's not so much the whole purpose of it. It's more so that the Lightning have really been giving out contracts, a lot of them, quite frankly, to players that have not been able to they've not worked out and not have been able to move out of Tampa Bay when need be. So I'm sure if there was no clause there in his contract, Sherry would be long gone by now. But I really think that is something I think a lot of Lightning fans need to keep an eye on as we're kind of progressing throughout the summer, getting ready for camp, getting ready for the upcoming season. So wrapping things up real quick on this first episode of Bleav in Lightning. First of all, I want to thank all of you for tuning in. Some of you, like I said, may know me from my previous work. And I hope if you're joining me for the first time, you enjoyed this and we'll continue to do these episodes. Of course, right now we might do 1 or 2 episodes a week because, things are a little bit quiet here, obviously with the Tampa Bay Lightning as well as the rest of the NHL. But once the season starts, we'll be posting anywhere from 3 episodes to week to even more, depending on if news requires it. And like I said, please go ahead, subscribe to our podcast wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. That's Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, wherever we are there, as well as on our YouTube platform. Go ahead and do that. And download the podcast, of course, please. That really helps us grow and reach more listeners. You can follow more of my work. If you want to reach out to me for a question that I can answer on the show, I want to keep these episodes very interactive. Go ahead and reach out to me at DankyDank on Twitter, DenkyD8NK. I respond to most people when I see it. So if you want to tweet to me or if you want to send me a message on the side, that works as well. Or if you're listening to us on YouTube, comment below and I will address it if it pertains to the segments that we are doing. But yeah, I think when we're talking about expectations for this season for the Tampa Bay Lightning, like I said before, obviously with the foundation of players that you have on this team, really the expectation should be, in my mind, is Stanley Cup or bust. I think that, especially when you're coming out of the East, and especially this year, I think this is as good as a year as any for the Lightning to get off to a hot start, to play as well as what they look like on paper, which I think is pretty good and pretty competitive compared to not only the rest of the Atlantic Division, but as well as the NHL, the Eastern Conference at least. I think that you have a chance to maybe even steal a top spot out of the East. Now, obviously, there's a lot of ifs, like I alluded to before early on in the episode, that you're relying on a lot of ifs. If Kucherov scores 140 points, if Hedman goes back to his old ways of being very good offensively and gets back to playing defense the right way, if Chernak picks up the slack and is able to play well, if we see McDonough play the way he played in Nashville. If Vasilevsky continues his play from what we saw in the playoffs last year, like I said, a lot of ifs involved, but I think that with some of the moves that we have seen from other teams, especially the division opponents, that being Boston trading away their number one goaltender, which I still don't understand the reasoning behind that. I think maybe it was just a matter of just not wanting to pay him, maybe. Um, Florida has taken a step back. As to how far back, we'll have to wait and see. As we all know, with defending Stanley Cup champions, it is hard and it is challenging to really bring back the entire team. Especially in today's salary cap era, there's really not many teams that are capable of doing that. As just with the nature of how the game is played, and you need 4 lines on the forward, and you need all 3 lines on the defensive pairings to really do their job and really come through. We saw that with Florida. A lot of those players wanted to get paid, and some of them didn't. Some of them went elsewhere. Also, the Bobrovsky factor there. What version of him are you going to get this year? As well as he played, I'm not taking anything for granted, as I do with any team or any player. So it's kind of just let's see how they look, throughout the course of the season. First 20, I always evaluate teams and see where they're at and really determine who they are and what their identity is by really American Thanksgiving and then the latest Christmas and New Year. I think that's a good measuring stick, because kind of unless you make a massive trade for a big time player, top 10 offensive player, or a top 10 player in the league overall, or goaltending, whatever the case may be, a move that really just drastically changes the nature of your outward performance. I think that really what you are at Thanksgiving and late November, late December as well, with Christmas and New Year, that is really what you're going to be for the rest of the year. It's very hard, and it's very few times that we have seen teams really be able to do a complete 180 at that point in the season. Most notably and most recently, the St. Louis Blues. At one point, they were dead last in the league, came back and won the cup. So, crazier things have happened. And the other team that I look at, and I always look at as a huge question mark, and this offseason I thought was going to be an offseason where they drastically change things. That has not been the case, has been the Toronto Maple Leafs. They have drastically needed goaltending. That is not something that they really addressed. They kind of just said, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here on a Lightning show and try and figure out what's behind the thinking when it comes to what other teams do. But if that was the Lightning, it would be driving me nuts. If they were in that situation for the last 3-4 years, goaltending wise, and then you have other issues where the team at times just doesn't look like they're clicking, that would be a huge problem for me personally if it was Tampa Bay. And I think, though, with those question marks that these opposing teams, these top 3 teams over the last couple of years in the Atlantic Division have going into this upcoming season, I think it's really just the Lightning's, really, they are the master of their own destiny. And I know that sounds super cliche, and I hate myself for saying that, but it's absolutely true. You look at what the other teams in the division have done to get better, and you have to say to yourself with an unbiased opinion that it's really not much. It really isn't. And you look at what the Lightning have done. Like I said, they have gotten a little bit younger. I think the players that they have are the veterans, I think, are in a good position to where you're still getting their prime years out of them. I don't care what other individuals say, this player or statistics or whatever, because, there's a lot of analytics out there that say players hit their prime and fall out of their prime at certain ages. And you'll find this out throughout the course of the season. I'm very big on the eye test with players. I don't care if they're 21 or if they're 41. If you're playing well and you look like it, that's great. And there are obviously little variables that can show you, and I'll explain those throughout the course of the season, as well as in my analysis, that show where those players are trending and if their plays sustainable. And that's really something that I think a lot of us will enjoy. Like I said, with the interactive segments that we will be having, a lot of that goes into play. And I think, though, going back real quick, I think that the Lightning, if they could get off to a good start, something that they weren't really able to do last year because of the absence of Andre Vasilevsky, where kudos to Jonas Johansson just having this team being able to tread water until Vasilevsky came back. I think they'll get off to a better start. They'll be amped up around Vasilevsky. I think this team will be able to play a little bit more freely, especially in the first line, not having to worry about appeasing a player's style like they did with Steven Stamkos. I think that you're going to see a different Lightning team and one for the better. And I think, yes, like I said before, there's going to be some bumps in the road, but I think that this team, with what the group they have, I think that they're a team that could definitely figure it out and adjust as the season goes on. And really, at the end of the day, that falls at the feet of John Cooper. So let me know on our YouTube page what you think about some of these questions and question marks that we're looking at towards this Lightning team. My expectation really for this Lightning team is and always will be Stanley Cup. But I think if you want to scale it a little bit back, because this Lightning team, we still don't know what their identity is going to be after losing a legendary player and adding a few, I would say, good quality players around them. I think that this is a team that's going to have to figure out their identity, and that could sometimes be a messy thing. But my expectation is Eastern Conference Final. I think that is something that is very appeasable. I think that is something that could definitely happen if the Lightning do finish in the top 3 in the Atlantic Division, which I think, with some of the other issues that may be surrounding the other top 3, as long as the Lightning do what they need to do to help themselves, I think that they will put themselves in a very good situation and a very good place to accomplish that feat. So, like I said, download the podcast, subscribe to our podcast wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. And that's been it for this episode of Bleav in Lightning with Adam Denker. And we'll be back to talk about more Lightning hockey next week. So